In visiting Laos, there is no question this place lies in the tropics. Lush green vegetation everywhere you look, and so much water. During our 4 weeks of travel, we had water crossings, large and small, pretty much every day. At first glance, these large rivers sometimes look like lakes because they seem so placid. But in reality, they've got some pretty swift current, and they are all moving huge amounts of water. Out in the remote rural areas, we mostly encountered these smaller waterways, and they were typically crossed with these cool little wooden bridges. Came upon this interesting little agricultural area with that dam structure on the right, and over here on the left they've got some ponds that they were perhaps raising fish in, and then there's the rice paddies, which you see in many places around the country. This was a pretty nice bridge structure with these metal plates along the tire paths, but if you notice in the center is some sketchy areas that if you dropped a motorcycle front tire in there, you'd be picking out some splinters for a while, or worse. This super beefy looking metal bridge structure was a rare sight. Didn't see many of these around the country. And down below there appeared to be a floating business district right along the river. Our morning crossing of this narrow bridge had one of those placid scenes that looked like a lake, but a glance over to the other side there were some protruding rocks that gave you a sense of the flow of the water going by. And a pan all the way to the right gives a look at the guest house that we had just left after spending the night there. This was a really nice guest house that we actually arrived at in the dark after fumbling around with some other failed attempts, so we didn't really get a good look at it until morning light. It backed right up to the river and had multiple levels of decks where you could enjoy the view. Quite the serene setting for breakfast that morning. And here's a look back over to the bridge that we're crossing in the video. Here's one of the funny little bridges that made it sound like you were riding your motorcycle across a xylophone. You can tell this crossing is in a populated area since there are multiple large bridges close together. This crossing was in another beautiful area. Had some impressive bare rock mountains off in the distance. It was also amusing to see these kids just hanging out on the bridge.
Wow. Come on.
There were a number of times when we were crossing a narrow bridge and we needed to coordinate with the oncoming traffic to get through. But this was the first and only time that we had to negotiate with one of the local critters. These small at-grade crossings were certainly doable here in the dry season, but I had to wonder what they must be like during the wet season, probably impassable much of the time. A common configuration at many of these rural waterways had two paths through, one for trucks and heavier vehicles that would cross at grade through the water, and then another route for motorcycles and pedestrians and lighter vehicles where they could cross over a wooden bridge. And speaking of at-grade crossings,
you went a little too fast, my friend.
Did you take this side or that side?
I went through the middle.
And how was that?
Deep. This,
I know.
he went fast through the middle and got soaked. He was
He
going,
didn't go in the middle. He took one of them.
well, that's what I'm saying. He went through the puddle. But this, okay, now go. It's easy. That's just really shallow, real shallow.
What is he doing?
This is going to go over the bridge.
Well, the next one is just this much water and it's very clear, so it's no problem.
But go faster, Einar, go faster.
Go faster.
With one hand.
this was the only bridge we encountered that was decorated with these flags, but we did find similar flags along the roads in some small towns. We were told this is related to an upcoming national holiday of some sort. This was an interesting crossing where we were on a newer concrete bridge that ran alongside an older looking suspension bridge. This certainly caught my attention, where there was debris deposited in the bottom of the bridge deck. That normally indicates a high water flow that's carrying branches and limbs, but if that were the case, it would have been an extremely high water flow. Looks like these days that older suspension bridge is dedicated to pedestrian traffic, which certainly would make it more enjoyable to stroll across the river without contending with vehicle traffic. Here's another one of those dual route crossings where trucks and heavier vehicles in this case are sent off to the right to do an at-grade crossing through the water, and the motorcycles and pedestrians are sent off to the left. Here we are going down that route through this cool little path that's a little more than a goat trail through the trees. Then as we finally approach the water crossing itself, you see this sketchy looking little wooden bridge. One of those things that makes you relieved to be on the other side without having crashed through. I found this to be one of the most interesting water crossings in all the time we were riding through Laos. It's in a remote rural area, but for some reason it was quite busy that day with traffic. Here is a boardwalk they've constructed for motorcycles and pedestrians to cross, while the larger, heavier vehicles do an at-grade crossing. Seemed like a fine time to pull over and do some spectating for a while. This was actually a somewhat rare sight to see a conventional looking truck or other vehicle out in these remote rural areas. We seldom saw anything like that driving along. A little difficult to get a good sense of it with all the lumber they've got piled on it, but these little buggies were somewhat common, usually hauling supplies like this. But far more common were these walk-behind tractors that we saw everywhere. Easy to imagine the tractor's long handlebars extending over farm implements like scrapers and plows, but much more common were trailers attached to them, hauling supplies as in this case, or often hauling people around, basically the family car. And here's one of those family cars now. While it was a fair bit longer than most of them, this bridge had that typical structure of the wooden deck. Must have been fairly new as well, because this one was in great condition. By contrast, here was a bridge that had a pretty sturdy structure to it, but many of the deck boards were just lying there, completely loose. Riding the bike over them would have you squirreling around a fair bit. Paying too little of attention could quickly get you into problems and probably result in another one of those splinter picking opportunities. This was a totally cool scene that I just happened to come upon at the right time. The crossing was really over a tiny stream, but the bridge was a little sketchy looking, especially for a heavy vehicle. Wisely, all the passengers had got out of the truck and walked across the bridge, helping reduce the weight of the truck. But I'm sure they're also thinking about not being part of the crash were that bridge to have given way. Fortunately, it wasn't my day to document a disaster.
Woo! Nice.
And then there is the mighty Mekong, an enormous river that runs over 3,000 miles from its origins in China. From there it proceeds south, and it defines a good portion of the border between Myanmar and China. It defines the entire border between Myanmar and Laos, and also about half the border between Thailand and Laos. From there it passes on through Cambodia and out through southern Vietnam to its ocean outfall. We ultimately made multiple crossings of the Mekong, but not always on a bridge. So in another video I will share some of the cool boat rides we had across this and other major waterways during our epic adventure riding around the country of Laos.